Long before the name Caesar became a title for emperors, it belonged to a man who walked the crowded streets of the Roman Republic. Born into an ancient but fading noble family, Julius Caesar rose through danger, rivalry, and war to shape the destiny of Rome itself. His life was a blend of ambition, charm, and ruthless calculation, moving from the dusty roads of Hispania to the grand halls of the Senate. Tonight, we will follow his story from the days before his birth to the moment his name became legend, tracing each step with quiet detail until the man becomes more than the myth. Before Julius Caesar took his first breath, the Roman Republic was already a giant in the Mediterranean world. For centuries, it had grown from a small city on the Tiber River into a vast state that stretched across Italy and far beyond. By the 2nd century before the birth of Christ, Rome had defeated great rivals such as Carthage in the Punic Wars and had claimed territories from Spain to Greece. Its armies were feared, its influence unmatched, and its culture was beginning to absorb the ideas, art, and knowledge of many conquered lands. The Republic was not a kingdom. Power rested in elected magistrates, guided by the Senate, an assembly of Rome's most influential men. Citizens gathered in voting assemblies to choose officials and pass laws, although the influence of wealth and noble family connections often shaped the results. At the top of the political year were the consuls, 2 leaders who shared authority for 12 months before stepping aside for their successors. Beneath them were praetors, aediles, quaestors, and a range of other officials, each with defined roles in law, order, and the management of the state. Roman society was divided into distinct classes. The patricians were the ancient aristocracy, families whose names carried great prestige. The plebeians were the majority, ordinary citizens who ranged from small farmers and craftsmen to merchants and laborers. A growing middle rank, the equiades, held wealth from trade and business but lacked the old aristocratic titles. Below them all were the slaves, men and women taken in war or born into servitude, who worked in homes, fields, mines, and workshops. This structure brought stability, but also tension, as wealth and privilege were far from evenly shared. Foreign affairs had brought both glory and strain. Victories in the Mediterranean filled Rome with riches, slaves, and new ideas, but they also brought corruption and greed. Provinces far from Italy needed governors, and these positions were often used for personal gain. Soldiers returning from years abroad sometimes found their farms neglected or taken, forcing them into the crowded city in search of work. The Republic was also scarred by political violence. A century before Caesar's birth, the brothers Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus had tried to reform land ownership and help the poor. Their efforts met fierce resistance from the Senate and ended in bloodshed. The balance between rich and poor, between Senate authority and popular will, had grown fragile. Rival politicians learned to use street gangs, bribery, and even assassinations to win advantage. By the time the 1st century before Christ began, the Roman Republic was powerful but unstable. It was a place where ambition could lift a man to the highest office, yet the same ambition could bring the state to the brink of collapse. The armies were loyal not just to the Republic, but to the generals who led them, and this loyalty could shift the fate of the entire nation. In such an atmosphere, the stage was set for a leader who could charm the people, command the legions, and outmaneuver the Senate. Rome was ready for someone like Julius Caesar. In the heat of a Roman summer in the year 100 before Christ, a child was born into a family whose name carried weight in history. His parents named him Gaius Julius Caesar. The Julii were an old patrician family, counted among the original aristocracy of Rome. Their ancestry was more than noble. Family tradition held that they were descended from Aeneas, the Trojan hero who fled the burning city and founded a new lineage in Italy. Through Aeneas, they claimed a connection to the goddess Venus herself. This divine link was more than a story for children. In the eyes of many Romans, it was a mark of destiny. Despite this ancient prestige, the Julii were not among the most powerful families of their time. Their name was respected, but their political influence had faded. Caesar's father, also named Gaius Julius Caesar, served as a praetor, a respectable rank in the Republic, and governed the province of Asia. His mother, Aurelia Cotta, came from a strong and well-regarded family. Aurelia was known for her intelligence, discipline, and ability to manage a household with dignity. She would become one of the most important influences on young Caesar's early life. Caesar grew up in the Subura district of Rome, a busy neighborhood not far from the Forum. Life there was a mix of noise and activity, with markets, craftsmen, and the constant movement of people. For a boy of noble birth, these surroundings offered a daily view of both the grandeur and the struggles of Roman life. He saw senators in their white togas and barefoot laborers carrying heavy loads through the streets. The young Caesar would learn early how varied and complex his city truly was. Education in a patrician family was taken seriously. Caesar was taught to read and write in Latin at an early age, then introduced to Greek, the language of philosophy and learning. He studied the works of Homer and other poets, along with the speeches of great orators. Public speaking was a valued skill in Rome, and even in his youth, Caesar practiced the art of using words to persuade and inspire. Physical training was also important. Running, riding, and handling weapons prepared him for the responsibilities expected of a Roman nobleman. From his mother, Caesar learned self-control, confidence, and the careful management of social connections. From his father, he inherited the idea that service to the Republic was both a duty and a path to honor. Although the Julii no longer held the political dominance of earlier generations, the family name gave Caesar entry into a network of patrician households where alliances could be built. Being born into a noble but weakened family shaped Caesar's ambitions. He had the pride of ancient lineage without the full power to match it. This combination could produce frustration, but it could also inspire determination. To restore the influence of his ancestors, Caesar would have to navigate the complex and often dangerous world of Roman politics. He would need charm, skill, and courage. Above all, he would need to win both the trust of the people and the respect, or at least the cooperation, of the Senate. In the years to come, Caesar's birthright would serve as both a shield and a banner. It would open certain doors while closing others, forcing him to create his own opportunities. For now, in the quiet years of his childhood, he was simply the son of Aurelia and Gaius, learning his lessons and observing the republic around him. Yet even then, the foundation was being laid for a life that would change the course of Roman history. As Caesar grew into manhood, Rome was entering a time of bitter political division. Two powerful factions had emerged. One was the party of the Optimates, the traditionalist senators who sought to preserve the authority of the Senate. The other was the Populares, who worked to win support from the people through reforms and direct appeals to the masses. Caesar's own family leaned toward the Populares, and this alignment would soon place him in serious danger. At a young age, Caesar was married to Cornelia, the daughter of Lucius Cornelius Cinna, a prominent leader of the Marian faction. Cinna had been an ally of Gaius Marius, a general and statesman beloved by the Populares but hated by the Optimates. This marriage bound Caesar to the Marian cause, whether or not he fully understood the political weight of that choice. It was a bond that would be tested when Rome fell under the control of a new and ruthless dictator. In the year 82 before Christ, Lucius Cornelius Sulla seized power after a violent civil war. Sulla had no love for the Marian faction and quickly set about purging his enemies. One of his orders was that Caesar must divorce Cornelia. The demand was not personal alone. It was a warning to all who still held ties to Sulla's rivals. Caesar refused. His decision was a remarkable act of loyalty and defiance for a young man without an army or a secure position. Sulla responded by stripping Caesar of his priesthood as flamen dialis and seizing his property. The threat to his life was real, and he was forced to flee Rome. Friends and family intervened on his behalf, persuading Sulla to spare him. According to later accounts, Sulla relented, but warned that within Caesar were many Mariuses, a remark suggesting that he saw the young man's potential for ambition and influence. With no position in Rome and little safety at home, Caesar turned to military service. He joined the army in Asia Minor, while serving under a provincial governor. In the siege of Mytilene, on the island of Lesbos, Caesar distinguished himself with bravery in combat. His courage earned him the civic crown, one of the highest honors for a Roman soldier, awarded for saving the life of a fellow citizen in battle. These years away from Rome gave Caesar valuable experience in leadership, discipline, and the harsh realities of war. It was during his return from this service that one of the most unusual and memorable events of his youth occurred. While traveling across the Aegean Sea, Caesar's ship was intercepted by pirates near the coast of Asia Minor. Taken prisoner, he was held for ransom. The pirates demanded a sum of 20 talents of silver for his release. Caesar, with a confidence that startled his captors, laughed at the figure and insisted they ask for 50 instead, declaring that they clearly did not understand the value of their prize. During his captivity, Caesar behaved less like a prisoner and more like a guest who had chosen to stay. He read poetry to the pirates, joined in their conversations, and even warned them, half in jest, that when he was free, he would return to capture and execute them. The pirates, amused by his composure, allowed him a degree of freedom unusual for a hostage. Once the ransom was paid and he was released, Caesar immediately set out to fulfill his promise. Gathering a small force from nearby cities, he tracked the pirates to their island base. He captured them without difficulty, reclaimed the ransom money, and had them crucified, showing the mix of charm and ruthlessness that would mark his later career. By ordering that their deaths be swift, he tempered justice with a degree of mercy, but the message was clear. Caesar was a man whose words carried weight, even to those who thought themselves beyond the reach of law. These early trials hardened Caesar's resolve and sharpened his skills. He had faced the threats of a dictator, the trials of war, and the dangers of lawless seas. Each challenge had been met with a combination of courage, wit, and calculated decisiveness. In the years ahead, these qualities would serve him well, but they would also draw him into greater conflicts, where the stakes were far higher than a ransom or a siege. For now, the young Julius Caesar had proven that he was more than the sum of his noble birth. He was a man capable of shaping his own fate. When Julius Caesar returned to Rome after his military service, the city was still recovering from the years of civil strife under Sulla. The political world was cautious, but opportunities existed for those who could win the trust of the people and navigate the shifting loyalties of the Senate. Caesar was still young, but he had already shown determination and skill in dangerous situations. Now he began to turn his attention toward a career in public life. One of his first steps was to enter the courts as an advocate. In Rome, the ability to speak well in public was as valuable as military skill. Orators shaped public opinion, defended clients, and attacked rivals. Caesar's style was direct yet elegant, mixing sharp logic with emotional appeal. His speeches stood out for their clarity and rhythm, and he soon gained a reputation as a gifted speaker who could hold the attention of any audience. These early successes in the courts gave him visibility and allowed him to make connections with influential figures. In the year 69 before Christ, Caesar was elected to the office of quaestor, an important early step in the Roman political ladder known as the cursus honorum. His assignment was in Hispania Ulterior, a province in the far west of the Republic. As quaestor, he managed finances and assisted the governor in administration. This role allowed Caesar to see firsthand how Rome's provinces were governed and how local loyalties could be won or lost. It was also in Hispania that he first encountered a statue of Alexander the Great. According to later accounts, he reflected with both admiration and frustration that by his own age, Alexander had conquered much of the known world, while he himself had yet to make a mark beyond minor office. This thought would remain with him as a quiet challenge to achieve more. During this period, Caesar's personal life changed. His wife Cornelia died, leaving him a widower. The marriage had been both a personal and political bond, and her death marked the end of one chapter in his life. Not long after, Caesar married Pompeia, the granddaughter of Sulla. This union may have been an attempt to mend ties with the Optimates, or at least to ease some of the tensions left by his earlier defiance. Pompeia was well connected, and the marriage linked Caesar to new social circles, though it would not last many years. Back in Rome, Caesar worked to expand his political base. One method was through public games and entertainments, a long-standing tradition in Roman politics. These events were more than mere distractions. They were opportunities for a politician to display generosity, win popular support, and make himself a household name. Caesar spent freely, often beyond his means, to stage impressive spectacles. Chariot races, gladiatorial contests, and theatrical performances all served to endear him to the common people. His willingness to incur debt in pursuit of popularity was a calculated risk, one that signaled his confidence in future success. In addition to the public games, Caesar invested time in building personal alliances. He visited influential senators, supported their causes when it suited his goals, and forged ties with equestrian businessmen whose wealth could aid him. His charm and ability to adapt his manner to different audiences made him welcome in many circles. While the optimates viewed him with caution, the populares saw in him a rising figure who could speak to the people and challenge entrenched power. By combining oratory, generosity, and strategic relationships, Caesar began to establish a presence that could not be ignored. His name appeared more often in public discussions, his influence was felt in the Senate, and his popularity among the masses grew steadily. Yet these gains came at a price. The debts he had taken on to finance his games would follow him, adding a constant pressure to advance to higher offices where wealth and power could be used to repay them. As the decade drew to a close, Caesar's ambition was no longer in question. He had moved from a promising advocate in the courts to an elected official with experience in the provinces, a man whose public generosity and private connections promised a larger role in the future of Rome. The skills he had honed in speaking, persuasion, and relationship building were now firmly in place. In the years ahead, these would become the foundation on which he would rise to the highest positions of the Republic, setting the stage for even greater challenges and rewards. By the late 60s before Christ, Julius Caesar had already begun to make himself a familiar figure in Rome. His oratory, generosity, and social connections had earned him recognition, but he still lacked the high offices that would allow him to truly shape policy and command the loyalty of the people. The next stage of his rise would require both bold ambition and calculated risk. In the year 65 before Christ, Caesar was elected aedile, a post responsible for the care of public buildings, the organization of festivals, and the maintenance of order in the city. For many politicians, the aedileship was a stepping stone, but for Caesar it became an opportunity to expand his popularity on a grand scale. He staged public games of remarkable size and splendor, filling the city with spectacles that delighted the crowds. Gladiatorial contests, theatrical performances, and elaborate decorations turned Rome into a stage for his personal brand of generosity. The cost of such events was enormous. Caesar financed much of it through loans, plunging himself into heavy debt. His creditors were willing to lend because they recognized that Caesar's growing influence could one day bring them profit. The gamble was clear: spend now to win the favor of the people, trusting that higher offices would later bring the wealth to repay what was owed. For Caesar, the investment was worth it, as the games secured him a place in the public imagination. His next leap forward came in the year 63 before Christ, when he stood for election as Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of the Roman state religion. The position was both prestigious and politically valuable, granting the holder great influence over public ceremonies and the interpretation of religious law. It was also a post held for life. Caesar's candidacy was bold, as he was still relatively young and faced older, more established rivals. Yet his combination of charm, political maneuvering, and promises of future support won the day. His victory was unexpected by many, and it gave him a permanent place among the most visible figures in Rome. With the title of Pontifex Maximus secured, Caesar continued his climb. In 62 before Christ, he was elected praetor, a senior magistrate responsible for administering justice. The office also offered opportunities to oversee certain public games and to command respect in both the Senate and the courts. Caesar fulfilled his duties efficiently, keeping his name in good standing with both the people and many senators, though some still regarded him with suspicion due to his alignment with the populares. After his praetorship, Caesar was assigned as governor of Hispania Ulterior, one of the far western provinces of the Republic. This was more than a reward for service. It was a chance to escape his creditors for a time, as governors were protected from legal pursuit while in office, and to rebuild his finances through the opportunities a provincial command provided. In Spain, Caesar proved to be an able administrator, ensuring taxes were collected and local disputes settled. But he also demonstrated his skill as a military commander. Campaigning against local tribes, Caesar won several swift victories, earning both glory and profit. His troops respected his leadership as he shared in their hardships and rewarded them generously. These campaigns brought him not only a military reputation, but also a share of the spoils, allowing him to repay some debts and strengthen his personal wealth. The combination of military success and political authority increased his standing in Rome even before his return. It was during his time in Spain that Caesar's ambition sharpened further. The provincial governorship had given him a taste of independent command and shown him how military achievements could translate into political capital. His victories allowed him to petition the Senate for a triumph, the grand military parade granted to successful generals. However, the rules required that a candidate for the consulship be present in Rome, and the timing meant he could not have both. Faced with the choice, Caesar chose the consulship, deciding that political advancement was worth more than a single day of glory. By the time he returned to Rome, Caesar had transformed himself from a debt-ridden young politician into a proven administrator, a respected military leader, and a lifelong religious figure in the heart of the Republic. His rise had been marked by careful calculation, strategic alliances, and the willingness to take financial risks to secure public favor. The foundation was now set for the next great leap in his career, one that would see him form alliances with the most powerful men in Rome and set in motion events that would change the Republic forever. By the late 60s before Christ, the Roman Republic was locked in a political struggle that seemed to have no end. The Senate, dominated by the Optimates, worked to preserve its control over the state. The Populares sought to bypass senatorial power by appealing directly to the people through laws and reforms. Neither side could completely overpower the other, and this constant deadlock created frustration and instability. Ambitious men saw that by joining forces, they might break through the gridlock and secure mutual advantage. At this moment, three figures stood out. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, known to history as Pompey the Great, was one of the most celebrated generals of his time. He had cleared the Mediterranean of pirates, defeated enemies in the east, and returned to Rome with immense prestige. Marcus Licinius Crassus was the wealthiest man in the Republic. His fortune built on property speculation, silver mines, and business ventures. Julius Caesar, though less powerful than the other two, had risen quickly and had shown both political skill and a willingness to take bold action. Each man had something the others lacked. Pompey had military glory but needed the Senate to approve his settlement of conquered territories and to grant land for his veterans. Crassus had wealth but wanted political influence and opportunities for further profit. Caesar had popularity among the people and a growing reputation, but he needed the backing of both money and military support to secure higher office. The three formed an informal agreement, later called the First Triumvirate. It was not an official body under Roman law, but rather a private pact to use their combined influence for mutual gain. Together, they could outmatch their political rivals in the Senate and push through measures that served their interests. To cement the alliance, Caesar arranged a marriage between his daughter Julia and Pompey. The union brought a personal bond between the two men, softening potential rivalries. Pompey and Julia were said to be genuinely devoted to each other, which strengthened the political connection for several years. With the support of Pompey and Crassus, Caesar secured election as consul for the year 59 before Christ. As consul, he shared power with Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, an Optimate ally of the Senate who opposed Caesar's plans at nearly every turn. Caesar, however, moved quickly to pass key reforms. He pushed through a law to distribute public land to poor citizens and veterans, directly fulfilling promises to Pompey's former soldiers. He also passed measures that favored Crassus's financial interests, such as easing the terms for tax collectors in Asia who had overpaid in bidding for contracts. Bibulus attempted to block Caesar's legislation by declaring unfavorable omens and retreating from public life, refusing to approve his co-consul's actions. This left Caesar in effective control of the government for the remainder of the year. Critics began to mock the period as the consulship of Julius and Caesar, highlighting the absence of shared authority. While Caesar's reforms pleased the people and strengthened his alliances, they also deepened hostility from the Senate's conservative faction. Many senators saw him as a dangerous figure, willing to undermine traditional procedures to achieve his goals. Tensions in the Senate chamber ran high, and Caesar found himself the target of constant political attacks. By the end of his consulship, Caesar had achieved much of what he set out to do. His allies had gained their rewards, his own popularity was at a peak, and his enemies were more determined than ever to stop him. To protect himself from prosecution after leaving office, Caesar secured a 5-year appointment as governor of Cisalpine Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, in Illyricum. This command would give him legal immunity, military authority, and the chance to expand his influence far beyond the city of Rome. The first triumvirate had begun as a practical arrangement among three powerful men, each using the others to advance his own ambitions. Yet in binding their fates together, they also set the Republic on a path toward greater conflict. For Caesar, the alliance was a launch point into a chapter of his life that would bring him unmatched fame, wealth, and power, but also set him on a collision course with some of the most formidable opponents Rome had ever produced. When Julius Caesar's consulship ended in 59 before Christ, he moved into a new phase of his career that would define his legacy. Through the agreements made with Pompey and Crassus, he secured a 5-year term as proconsul over Cisalpine Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, and Illyricum. These territories stretched from northern Italy into the southern reaches of what is now France, and they offered both strategic importance and opportunities for expansion. This command gave Caesar control over several legions, along with the authority to wage war and govern in the name of the Republic. At first, his role was to maintain Roman order in these provinces and protect them from hostile tribes. But events in 58 before Christ quickly expanded his mission into one of the most ambitious military campaigns in Roman history. In that year, the Helvetii, a large Celtic tribe, began migrating from what is now Switzerland toward the west. Their movement threatened the stability of neighboring tribes and Roman allies. Caesar acted decisively, blocking their path and engaging them in battle. The Helvetii were defeated, and their forced return to their homeland sent a clear message that Rome would not tolerate major shifts in the balance of power in Gaul without its consent. This victory was only the beginning. Soon after, Caesar was called upon to aid the Aedui, a Gallic tribe allied with Rome, who were under pressure from the Germanic Suebi under their king Ariovistus. Caesar marched his legions north, confronted Ariovistus, and defeated him in battle. These early victories secured Caesar's position in the region and gave him the loyalty of his troops. Over the next years, Caesar's campaigns expanded into a complex web of battles, alliances, and political maneuvering. He subdued tribes in Belgica, fought against rebellious coalitions, and even crossed the Rhine into Germanic territory to show that Rome could project power beyond the traditional borders. His brief expeditions to Britain in 55 and 54 before Christ, though not resulting in permanent conquest, added to his reputation for daring and ambition. One of the most remarkable episodes of these years was his relationship with the Gallic leader Vercingetorix. In 52 before Christ, a large-scale rebellion broke out among the Gallic tribes. Vercingetorix, a chieftain of the Arverni, managed to unite many of the tribes against the Romans, something no leader had achieved before. His strategy was not to face Caesar in open battle immediately, but to wage a war of attrition, burning towns and destroying supplies to deny the Romans resources. Caesar pursued him through the countryside, winning some engagements but failing to secure a decisive victory. The conflict came to its climax at the fortified hill town of Alesia. Vercingetorix and his forces were besieged by Caesar, who constructed massive walls and fortifications around the city to prevent escape, and additional outer defenses to hold off any relieving forces. The siege of Alesia became a test of endurance for both sides. The Gauls launched repeated attacks from within, while a vast relief army attempted to break the Roman lines from without. For days, fierce fighting raged across the fortifications. Caesar's careful planning, engineering skill, and the discipline of his legions held firm. Eventually, the relieving forces were defeated, and Vercingetorix surrendered. In a gesture meant to preserve the dignity of his people, he reportedly rode out in full armor, circled Caesar, and laid down his weapons at the general's feet. With the fall of Alesia, organized resistance in Gaul largely collapsed. Some smaller uprisings occurred, but by 50 before Christ, the territory was firmly under Roman control. These campaigns had brought vast wealth to Caesar through war spoils, tribute, and the sale of prisoners into slavery. They also gave him unmatched military prestige. Equally important was the loyalty he commanded from his soldiers. Caesar shared in their hardships, marched with them, and rewarded them generously after victories. The legions he had led through years of constant campaigning saw him not only as their commander, but as the man responsible for their fortunes. In an age when armies could decide the fate of states, this loyalty was an immense source of power. Back in Rome, news of Caesar's victories was met with both admiration and alarm. Among the people, He was a hero who had expanded the Republic's frontiers and brought in riches. Among his political rivals, especially in the Senate's conservative faction, he was a dangerous figure whose growing power threatened the balance of the Republic. His commentaries on the Gallic War, written in clear and straightforward Latin, allowed him to present his own version of events to the public, further shaping his image as a brilliant and decisive leader. By the end of his proconsulship, Caesar stood at the height of his fame. He had transformed the map of Gaul, brought new provinces under Roman control, and gained the devotion of experienced and battle-hardened legions. Yet the very success of these campaigns made conflict at home inevitable. The Senate would be reluctant to allow such a powerful man to return to Rome without conditions. Caesar knew that his future now depended not only on military skill, but also on his ability to navigate the treacherous politics of the Republic. The conquest of Gaul was both a triumph and a turning point. It had given Caesar everything he needed to rise higher still, but it had also deepened the divisions in Rome that would soon erupt into open war. For now, he remained in the provinces, a general whose name carried weight across Europe, preparing for the next move in a game that would decide the fate of the Roman world. The alliance that had once bound Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, and Marcus Licinius Crassus together was never built to last. It had been a partnership of convenience, balancing three powerful ambitions against a hostile Senate. For a time, it worked. But by the mid-50s before Christ, the threads began to unravel. Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome and a key mediator between the other two, set his sights on military glory to match his fortune. He led a campaign against the Parthian Empire in the east, but the venture ended in disaster. In 53 before Christ, he was killed at the Battle of Carrhae, along with much of his army. His death removed the final piece holding Caesar and Pompey in cautious cooperation. Another blow came the following year with the death of Julia, Caesar's beloved daughter and Pompey's wife. Their marriage had been more than personal. It had been the strongest bond between the two men. Without her, the personal trust that had softened their political rivalries vanished. In Rome, the Senate grew increasingly wary of Caesar's growing power. His victories in Gaul had brought him wealth, prestige, and the loyalty of seasoned legions. Many senators feared that if he returned to Rome with his army, he could dominate the state. Pompey, who had once been Caesar's equal partner, now began to side with the Optimates, the conservative faction in the Senate. In 52 before Christ, he was appointed sole consul, a position that gave him sweeping authority. From this position, Pompey worked to limit Caesar's influence, passing laws that made it more difficult for him to run for office in absentia and demanding that he disband his army before returning to Rome. Caesar, still in Gaul, faced a choice. To surrender his command as the Senate demanded would leave him vulnerable to prosecution by his enemies. To refuse was to risk civil war. As the year 50 before Christ drew to a close, the Senate, under Pompey's guidance, ordered him to disband his legions and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar's response was to gather his troops and march south. In January of 49 before Christ, he reached the Rubicon River, the boundary between his province and Italy proper. To cross with his army would be an act of open rebellion. According to later accounts, he paused on the bank before declaring the words in Greek that history would preserve in Latin, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. Then he led his men across. The speed of Caesar's advance caught Pompey off guard. Pompey and many senators fled Rome, sailing to Greece to gather an army from the eastern provinces. Caesar entered the city without resistance, taking control of the treasury and securing his position in Italy. He then turned to confront Pompey directly. The civil war played out across a wide theater, from Spain to the Balkans. In 48 before Christ, the two great commanders finally faced each other in a decisive battle at Pharsalus in Thessaly. Pompey's forces outnumbered Caesar's, but Caesar's legions were veterans hardened by years of campaigning in Gaul. The battle was fierce, but Caesar's tactical skill and the discipline of his troops prevailed. Pompey's army collapsed, and he fled the field. Pompey sought refuge in Egypt, hoping that the young king Ptolemy the Florentine would offer him protection. Egypt, at the time, was a client kingdom of Rome, its politics tangled in a power struggle between Ptolemy and his sister Cleopatra. Believing they could win Caesar's favor by removing his rival, Ptolemy's advisors arranged for Pompey to be assassinated as he stepped ashore. He was killed before he could even plead his case. his head severed and presented to Caesar when he arrived days later. The sight of Pompey's severed head reportedly moved Caesar to tears. Despite their rivalry, they had once been allies, and Pompey had been married to his daughter. Caesar is said to have turned away in sorrow, ordering proper rites for his former friend and son-in-law. The civil war was far from over. Pompey's death removed the most prominent leader of the senatorial faction, but resistance to Caesar continued in Africa, Spain, and the East. Yet the victory at Pharsalus and the fall of Pompey marked a decisive turning point. Caesar now stood as the most powerful man in the Roman world, with no equal to challenge him directly. The march from the Rubicon to the shores of Egypt had transformed the political landscape of the Republic. In a few short years, Caesar had moved from a provincial governor threatened with political ruin to a military and political master of Rome. But the cost had been immense. Civil war had torn through the Republic, setting Roman against Roman, and the institutions of the state were strained to their limits. As Caesar lingered in Egypt, becoming entangled in the kingdom's internal struggles, it was clear that the consequences of this conflict were still unfolding. The republic that had stood for centuries was now deeply wounded, and the question was no longer whether Caesar would return to Rome in triumph, but whether the republic itself could survive his return. When Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt in pursuit of Pompey, he found the situation far more complex than a simple conclusion to the civil war. Pompey was already dead, murdered on the orders of Ptolemy XIII's advisors. Egypt was in the midst of its own dynastic struggle between Ptolemy and his sister Cleopatra VII. Caesar, seeing an opportunity, chose to intervene. Cleopatra, then in exile, managed to meet Caesar in secret. Ancient accounts claim she entered the palace concealed in a rug or bedding sack, a theatrical gesture that secured her audience with the Roman general. Caesar, impressed by her intelligence, charisma, and political acumen, decided to back her claim to the throne. This alliance was not purely political, it quickly became personal as well. Caesar's support for Cleopatra drew him into a short but intense conflict in Alexandria. Fighting broke out between his forces and those loyal to Ptolemy. The battles were fought in the streets and along the harbors, with Caesar nearly losing his life during one skirmish. Eventually, Ptolemy's forces were defeated, and Cleopatra was restored to the throne alongside her younger brother, with whom she nominally co-ruled. During his stay in Egypt, Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Ptolemy XV, known as Caesarion, whom she claimed was fathered by Caesar. In 47 before Christ, Caesar departed Egypt to address other crises in the east. One of these involved King Pharnaces II of Pontus, who had taken advantage of the Roman civil war to seize territory. Caesar confronted him at the Battle of Zela, winning a swift and decisive victory. In a letter to the Senate, he famously summarized the campaign with the words, Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. After his eastern campaign, Caesar returned to Rome to consolidate his position. The Senate appointed him dictator, initially for a limited term, but his authority continued to expand. He began to reshape the state with a series of sweeping reforms. One of his most lasting achievements was the reformation of the Roman calendar. The old lunar system had fallen into disarray, with months drifting out of alignment with the seasons. Drawing on Egyptian astronomical knowledge, Caesar introduced the Julian calendar, a solar-based system of 365 days with a leap year every fourth year. This calendar, with minor adjustments, is still in use today. Caesar also set about addressing Rome's urban and social issues. He initiated large-scale building projects to beautify the city and create jobs. Public spaces were renovated, basilicas and temples were restored, and plans were made for new forms. He passed laws granting Roman citizenship to many communities in the provinces, extending the privileges of the capital to loyal allies. His reforms sought to bind the far-reaching territories of the Republic more closely to the center of power in Rome. But the Republic was still unstable. Caesar faced ongoing resistance from those who had fled Rome after the Civil War. Many of Pompey's allies regrouped in Africa, supported by King Julius of Numidia. In 46 before Christ, Caesar led a campaign against them, culminating in the Battle of Thapsus. The victory was decisive, crushing organized senatorial resistance in Africa. From there, Caesar turned to Spain, where the sons of Pompey had gathered an army. In 45 before Christ, he fought them at the Battle of Munda. This was one of the most difficult and bloody battles of his career. Caesar's forces prevailed, but the cost in lives was heavy. With the defeat of Pompey's heirs, no major military opposition remained to challenge his authority. Back in Rome, Caesar was appointed dictator for 10 years, a term that effectively gave him unrivaled control of the Republic. He continued to pass reforms aimed at stabilizing the state. Debts were reduced through legislation that balanced the needs of creditors and debtors. Grain distribution was restructured to prevent abuse of the free grain system. He sought to expand the Senate by adding new members from Italy and the provinces, a move intended to weaken the dominance of the old aristocracy. His policies, however, were not universally welcomed. Many senators resented his centralization of power and his willingness to bypass traditional checks and balances. Rumors spread that he intended to declare himself king, a title the Romans had despised since the expulsion of their last monarch nearly 5 centuries earlier. Despite the growing unease among the elite, Caesar remained confident. He planned grand projects, including the conquest of Parthia, which would have avenged Crassus's defeat and extended Roman power deep into the east. In the meantime, he continued to appear in public as both a statesman and a war hero, hosting games, presiding over Senate sessions, and attending religious ceremonies. By the beginning of 44 before Christ, Caesar's position seemed unassailable. He had triumphed in civil war, subdued Rome's foreign enemies, and enacted reforms that touched nearly every aspect of Roman life. Yet beneath the surface, opposition was hardening. The very concentration of power that allowed Caesar to act so decisively was viewed by many as a threat to the Republic's survival. The man who had crossed the Rubicon and reshaped Rome's political world now stood at the height of his authority. But the forces that had once feared his rise were gathering once again, preparing to confront him in a way he did not expect. Julius Caesar was more than the sum of his victories and titles. His political genius and military brilliance were matched by a personality that fascinated both allies and enemies. Caesar was known for his remarkable self-confidence and ambition, yet he possessed a charm that won over the common people. He addressed crowds with clarity and conviction, making complex political ideas feel personal and direct. For many Romans, he was not simply a distant ruler, but a figure who seemed to understand their struggles and aspirations. As a leader, Caesar was decisive and relentless. He valued loyalty above all, and rewarded those who served him faithfully. His soldiers admired his willingness to share their hardships, eating the same rations and marching alongside them through mud and rain. On campaign, he slept in the open with his troops and personally inspected fortifications and siege works. His capacity for rapid decision-making often allowed him to seize the advantage in battle before his opponents could react. In his private life, Caesar was disciplined in some respects, but indulgent in others. He was attentive to his appearance, often criticized for what some saw as vanity. Ancient sources mention his careful grooming, his preference for wearing a laurel wreath that may have been used to conceal thinning hair, and his distinctive red boots, a mark of personal style. His health, however, was not flawless. There are accounts suggesting he suffered from episodes that may have been seizures, though their exact nature remains uncertain. Despite these possible ailments, he maintained an intense workload that would have exhausted most men. Caesar was also a man of letters. His commentary De Bello Gallico offered a detailed account of his campaigns in Gaul, presented in clear and unadorned Latin. These writings were as much political tools as historical records, designed to enhance his image in Rome and justify his actions. He portrayed himself as rational, restrained, and acting in the interest of the Republic. Later, his commentary De Bello Civili provided his version of the events leading to the Civil War, again framing his choices as necessary and just. These works remain valuable to historians, though they are far from impartial. The public and private aspects of Caesar's life often blended into the realm of rumor and propaganda. He was linked romantically to several women of influence, both Roman and foreign. His relationship with Cleopatra was the most famous, but whispers in Rome suggested liaisons with noblewomen, including Servilia, the mother of Brutus. Political opponents seized on these stories, portraying him as a man of excessive passions or dangerous foreign entanglements. One rumor, intended as an insult, accused him of a youthful affair with King Nicomedes of Bithynia. Caesar dismissed such talk publicly, but it was repeated by his rivals for years. These personal attacks were part of a broader political struggle. In the highly competitive world of Roman politics, character assassination was a common weapon. Caesar himself was no stranger to using reputation as a tool. He carefully cultivated the image of a generous, unstoppable leader. His public games, triumphal processions, and acts of clemency were designed to win loyalty not just through fear or respect, but through genuine admiration. To the common people, Caesar represented opportunity. He extended citizenship, reduced debts, and opened paths for men of talent rather than only those of noble birth. To many in the Senate, however, he was a dangerous figure who concentrated too much power in his own hands. This divide between popular support and elite suspicion defined much of his career. In person, Caesar could be warm and engaging, capable of remembering small details about those he met, a skill that made individuals feel valued. He could also be calculating, steering conversations toward his political goals. This combination of personal magnetism and strategic thinking made him one of the most effective leaders Rome had ever seen. By the final years of his life, Caesar was both a man and a myth. He had shaped the Republic in ways that would outlast him, yet he remained vulnerable to the same jealousies, fears, and ambitions that drove Roman politics. Understanding the man behind the legend reveals not only his extraordinary talents, but also the human complexities that made his story enduring. By the spring of 44 BCE, Caesar's power was greater than any Roman leader in generations. He had been named dictator for life, restructured the political calendar, launched ambitious reforms, and claimed the loyalty of much of the army. Yet his growing authority alarmed many in the Senate. Some feared that the Republic, already weakened by decades of civil strife, was slipping toward monarchy. The traditional balance between the Senate, the magistrates, and the people seemed to have vanished, replaced by a single dominant figure. The unease was not confined to Caesar's political enemies. Even some of his allies grew concerned. Senators who had fought beside him in the Civil War now worried that he intended to make himself king. A rumor spread that he planned to leave for a massive campaign against Parthia, and that he might not return, instead installing loyal governors to control Rome in his absence. To defenders of the old republican system, this seemed like the final step toward a permanent dictatorship. Among those who began to consider action were Gaius Cassius Longinus and Marcus Junius Brutus. Cassius, a seasoned military commander, resented Caesar's dominance and feared for the Senate's independence. Brutus was more conflicted. He had received honors from Caesar and was respected by him, yet he was deeply influenced by his family's history of opposing tyranny. His ancestor Lucius Junius Brutus had been celebrated for driving out Rome's last king centuries earlier. For Brutus, the thought of the Republic being replaced by one-man rule struck at the core of his identity. In the weeks leading up to mid-March, Cassius and Brutus gathered supporters quietly. The conspiracy grew to include more than 60 senators, each with their own motives. Some acted from principle, others from ambition or personal grievances. Meetings were held in private homes to avoid suspicion. The conspirators agreed that the only way to preserve the Republic was to kill Caesar before he could set out for the east. The day chosen was the 15th of March, the Ides according to the Roman calendar. Caesar was scheduled to attend a session of the Senate in the Theater of Pompey, a grand building that served as a meeting place while the Senate House in the Forum was being repaired. Some ancient accounts claim that Caesar had been warned by soothsayers to beware the Ides of March. On the morning of the session, his wife Calpurnia urged him not to attend, troubled by ominous dreams and strange portents. Caesar hesitated but was persuaded by one of the conspirators, Decimus Brutus, to go. When Caesar entered the Senate chamber, the conspirators surrounded him under the pretext of presenting petitions. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then one senator approached and seized Caesar's toga, pulling it down from his shoulders. The first knife strike came quickly, followed by many more. Ancient writers differ on the exact number of wounds, but the attack was swift and chaotic. In the confusion, Caesar is said to have recognized Brutus among his attackers. He covered his head with his toga and collapsed at the base of Pompey's statue, a symbolic and grim reminder of Rome's recent political violence. The killing did not produce the outcome the conspirators had expected. Instead of restoring the Republic, the assassination threw Rome into shock and turmoil. Many senators fled the scene in panic, uncertain how the public would react. Word of Caesar's death spread rapidly, and fear gripped the city. Supporters of the dictator, including Mark Antony, moved quickly to secure his papers, will, and treasury. In the days that followed, tensions rose. Antony gave a public funeral oration that stirred the crowd's emotions. He displayed Caesar's blood-stained toga and read from the will, which left gifts of money and land to the people of Rome. The sight of the wounds and the generosity of the bequests transformed the crowd's mood from unease to fury. Riots broke out, and a mob burned the houses of some conspirators. Brutus and Cassius found themselves unable to control the situation. They had believed that the Senate and the people would hail them as liberators, but instead they were forced to leave the city under the shadow of popular outrage. Far from restoring the Republic, their act had unleashed a wave of instability that would lead to another round of civil wars. The Ides of March became a date forever associated with betrayal and the fall of a leader. In killing Caesar, the conspirators sought to preserve Rome's traditions, but they instead set in motion the chain of events that would end the Republic entirely. The streets of Rome would soon see more armies, more political purges, and the rise of a new kind of ruler, one who would take the title of emperor. The death of Julius Caesar did not mark the end of his influence. In many ways, it was only the beginning. Among those most affected by the assassination was his grandnephew and adopted son, Gaius Octavius. Known to history as Octavian and later Augustus, he was just 18 years old when Caesar was killed. At first, few in Rome considered him a serious political force. Yet Octavian possessed a sharp mind, a patient temperament, and an unwavering determination to claim the inheritance left to him. Caesar's will named Octavian as his primary heir. This gave him not only immense personal wealth, but also a powerful political connection to the man many Romans still adored. Octavian understood the value of that connection. He presented himself as the rightful successor, the one who would avenge Caesar's death and complete his work. While the assassins hoped the Republic would return to its old ways, Octavian moved swiftly to ensure that Caesar's name remained at the center of Roman politics. He formed a tense alliance with Mark Antony and Marcus Lepidus, creating the Second Triumvirate. Together they pursued the conspirators across the provinces, defeating Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi. Although this alliance began as a united front, Octavian used the years that followed to strengthen his own position, while gradually weakening Antony's. By the time the rivalry between them reached its final stage, Octavian had the loyalty of the Senate, much of the army, and the people of Rome. In 27 BCE, he would take the title Augustus, becoming the first emperor of Rome. The foundations for this transformation were partly laid by Caesar himself. His reforms had touched nearly every part of Roman life. The Julian calendar, still recognizable in modern form, brought order to the measurement of time. His expansion of citizenship extended the rights and privileges of Rome to many who had once been outsiders. He undertook major urban planning projects, clearing slums, improving public buildings, and beginning new construction that would outlast him. His reorganization of the provinces created a more efficient system of governance, one that his successors would adapt for imperial rule. Yet Caesar's reforms were not without controversy. To some, they represented the forward-looking vision of a leader willing to adapt Rome to a changing world. To others, they were evidence of an ambition that disregarded tradition and concentrated too much power in one man's hands. Even in his lifetime, Caesar was both celebrated as a hero of the people and denounced as a destroyer of the Republic. This dual image has endured for more than 2,000 years. Historians, writers, and political leaders have continued to debate his legacy. Was he a brilliant statesman who broke the old order to create something stronger, or a skilled opportunist who dismantled the checks and balances of a free state? The answer may lie somewhere between the two. Caesar was a man of extraordinary abilities, but also one whose rise was made possible by the fractures and weaknesses that had been growing in Rome for decades. Part of the reason his story has lasted is that it is more than the biography of a single man. It is the story of a republic in crisis, of loyalty and betrayal, of ambition and fate. It contains moments of great drama, military victories against impossible odds, political maneuvers in the Senate, the sudden and violent end on the Ides of March, but also quieter moments that reveal a keen intelligence and a restless energy. His writings, particularly his commentaries, allow us to hear his voice across the centuries, describing his campaigns with precision and clarity. Even now, Rome bears his mark. The Forum still stands, with the ruins of temples and arches recalling the city he knew. His name is carved in marble, stamped on coins, and written in the pages of ancient histories. The empire that would rise after him owed much to his vision, whether by direct design or by the unintended consequences of his actions. As the centuries have passed, Caesar has been reimagined countless times, as a tyrant to be feared, a reformer to be admired, a military genius, a tragic figure undone by his own success. Yet through all these interpretations, the core of his story remains the same. A man of unmatched ambition who changed the course of Roman history forever. And so as the dust of history settles, Rome still stands. The city's stones have weathered the passing of empires, the rise and fall of rulers, and the shifting tides of the world. Among them lingers the memory of Julius Caesar, a man whose life and death became part of the very fabric of the eternal city. In the quiet of those ancient streets, it is still possible to imagine the sound of his footsteps and to feel the enduring presence of the legacy he left behind.